Revolution is one of the most important events in American history. Without it, America would have never gained its independence and would still be a part of the British Empire. Pretty much everyone knows this fact, but today we're going to explore the Revolution in a little more depth. The American Revolution rose from the French and Indian War. American colonies were forced to pay excessive taxes to refund Britain's losses and pay for their reparations. This, of course, led to civil unrest along with events such as the Boston Tea Party and the battles of Lexington and Concord. One of the more influential products of the American Revolution was the Declaration of Independence. Written by Thomas Jefferson and the other committee of 5 members, the Declaration lists grievances including imposing unfair taxes, ignoring citizens and government officials' basic rights, and denying the colonists representation in the British government. Because of this, the Declaration of Independence was an important contribution to the concept of democracy, as it establishes the concept of unalienable rights and claims that citizens should have the right to construct their government as they see fit. Obviously, the article wasn't well received in Britain. The king had a rebuttal drafted and troops sent over to the colonies. Arguably, this is the true start of the Revolution. Colonist troops were led by George Washington, who was backed by Captain Baron von Steuben and General Marquis de Lafayette. George Washington was sought after for his decisiveness, wisdom, and overall charisma. He was resilient, as he was faced with just as many defeats as he was victories, but never once shied away from the challenge. He pushed his army to do the same. For example, the colonial troops endured harsh conditions and supply shortages while seeking shelter in Valley Forge. However, it's these hardships and Washington's encouragement that strengthened their loyalty and passion for the cause. In a way, their adversities helped as much as they harmed. On top of this, the colonists were often outnumbered, with British troops reaching 50,000 and colonists never having more than 48,000 of their 145,000 soldiers deployed at once. Not to mention that Native Americans sided with the British, for British rule was the only factor preventing colonists from expanding farther into the natives' territory. Yet somehow, Washington was still able to lead the small force to their eventual victory. And for these reasons, he is one of the most successful American military leaders to date. Despite this, no matter how successful a leader he was, Washington wasn't all responsible for America's victory. The American colonies had a few key advantages during the war, which covers 2 areas, geography and diplomacy. Because of this combined with Washington's persistence, the outnumbered colonial army was able to achieve victory over Britain. The colonists were more familiar with the land than the British, which allowed for easier navigation and strategic planning. The climate of continental America, such as the South's humidity, depleted Britain's supplies quickly. Thus, the colonists were able to win the battles of Saratoga, Trenton, and Yorktown with ease, the latter of which the British General Cornwallis surrendered at. Additionally, voyaging the Atlantic Ocean to fight was taxing for the British, who could barely supply enough for their ships. On the other hand, the colonists were fighting in their homeland, with all their supplies readily available to them. As far as diplomacy goes, the colonists had just as much outside help as the British. Committee of 5 members Benjamin Franklin and John Adams worked to persuade the French into an alliance with the American colonies. Technically, the French didn't want to help in the first place. And when they did finally offer aid after the Battle of Saratoga, it wasn't for the purest of reasons. Their original intent was to seek vengeance on Britain through the Revolution. But either way, the help was appreciated. What came about France's help was the Treaty of Amity and Commerce and the Treaty of Alliance. In both treaties, France identified colonial America as its own sovereign nation. Of course, Britain didn't like this, and declared war on France. The Treaty of Commerce specifically encouraged trade between France and the colonial America, while the Treaty of Alliance established a diplomatic relationship between the two. Thus, the French alliance was born. France backed the Continental Army heavily in the military sense. They supplied troops, weapons, and other necessities even before the treaty had officially been signed. French assistance was possibly one of the biggest deciding factors in the war's outcome, even more so than George Washington. It should be noted that in the time of the Revolution, the American colonies saw a dramatic social shift. Minorities made consistent contributions to the war effort, and though many may have overlooked this fact, their roles are significant. Many blacks became soldiers fighting for a liberated nation and, as they hoped, possibly their own freedoms. Two prime examples are Peter Salem and Colonel Ty, who fought in the Continental Army and Black Brigade respectively. Women often served as spies collecting intel, or on production lines supplying troops. Most notably is Martha Washington, wife of George Washington, who brought supplies to troops staying at Valley Forge. This calmed an uprising that was in progress, and possibly restored the soldiers' faith. Not all served huge roles in the war, but they did play parts that were worth mentioning. For instance, Nancy Hart protected her family from intruding soldiers by trapping and deceiving them. While society's notions on these minorities didn't budge much, in the case of blacks, they had inched closer to their eventual freedom. Mostly because the colonists found it highly hypocritical to promote liberty but still rely on slave labor. Finally, in 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed, putting an official end to the American Revolution and granting colonists their freedom. Even after the 7-Year War, the involved countries still felt lasting effects. All three experienced devastation socially and financially. Soldiers had died or gone missing, and those left were impoverished. France, Britain, and America were left in debt. Though America claimed victory, it was an almost bittersweet one, and the newly founded country would face many more challenges as it shaped itself into the nation we know today.